At the dawn of the 21st century, human evolution reaches a critical turning point. Evolution, which had once favored intelligence above all else, now begins to reward entirely different traits. Science fiction had long predicted that future civilizations would grow more intelligent with each passing generation, but as time moves forward, humanity heads in the opposite direction. Without natural predators to threaten their survival, human evolution starts favoring those who reproduce the most prolifically. A highly intelligent couple debates endlessly about having children, waiting for the perfect moment to make such a momentous decision. Meanwhile, a couple with low intelligence welcomes their fifth baby into the world. 5 years pass, and the intelligent couple still hesitates to have children, citing financial insecurity as their reason. During this same period, the man with low intelligence fathers 9 children with 3 different women. Another 5 years roll by, and the intelligent couple finally decides to have children, only to discover they cannot conceive. The man with low intelligence now has 11 children, while his eldest son has fathered 4 children with 4 different women. 5 more years pass, and the man with low intelligence suffers a fatal accident, but doctors save his life, thanks to recent advances in stem cell research. Another 5 years elapse, and the intelligent man dies from a heart attack. His wife preserves her eggs through freezing and waits for the right donor. This pattern continues for generations. Those with limited intelligence reproduce freely while the intelligent choose abstinence. The year 2005 arrives. U.S. military librarian Joe Bauers faces replacement by another serviceman. Joe receives selection for a new assignment he doesn't want, but he has no choice in the matter. Military General Collins explains to his peers that Joe earned selection for the human hibernation experiment because he represents the most average soldier in the armed forces. He remains unmarried, has no living parents, and grew up as an only child. Should the experiment fail, no one will ask questions. The military encounters more difficulty finding a female candidate, and turns to the private sector. They select an adult worker named Rita, in exchange for dropping her criminal charges, and providing certain benefits to her representative. The experiment places both Rita and Joe in dry freeze for 1 year. If successful, humans will achieve the ability to hibernate indefinitely. The next day, Joe and Rita converse, with Rita mentioning that she creates paintings. Both enter their pods and fall into deep sleep. The experiment proceeds in complete secrecy, with no other personnel aware of its existence. Later, authorities arrest General Collins on corruption charges. The massive scandal leads to the base's closure, and the entire project fades into obscurity. As years pass, Joe and Rita remain dormant while humanity's collective intelligence plummets exponentially. The population explodes, and intelligence continues declining until humanity cannot solve even basic problems like garbage disposal. Refuse accumulates for centuries without any organized plan, ultimately leading to the Great Garbage Avalanche of 2505. The avalanche carves its destructive path through the city, crashing into Frito Pendejo's apartment along with Joe's hibernation pod. The pod opens, releasing Joe from his long slumber. Joe asks for Officer Collins, but Frito tells him to shut up. When Joe asks where he is, Frito angrily throws him out. Completely bewildered, Joe begins wandering the unfamiliar streets. The English language has deteriorated into a crude mixture of slang and grunts. Joe can understand the degraded speech, but his proper pronunciation sounds pretentious to the locals. Joe visits a nearby hospital, and tells the receptionist that he participated in an army experiment, and feels unwell. The receptionist directs him to the diagnostic area. When he attempts to drink water, a green liquid flows out instead. He asks the person behind him for water, and the person bursts into laughter at his request. He proceeds to the diagnostic area where staff members hand him 3 plugs to insert in his mouth, ear, and rectum. While waiting for the doctor, he notices the year 2505 printed in a magazine. The doctor arrives and begins speaking in crude slang. Joe demands that he speak seriously. The doctor hands him a bill instead and instructs him to scan his tattoo for payment. Upon noticing the same year printed on the bill, Joe peers out the window and observes a completely devastated cityscape. The doctor sounds an alarm, shouting that Joe remains unscannable. The crushing realization hits Joe that everyone he once knew has died. He rushes outside, awakening to find himself in a world consumed by crisis. The economy lies in complete ruin. A massive dust bowl has destroyed all food supplies. He watches a woman desperately fighting with a malfunctioning machine for French fries. Police officers arrive and arrest Joe for being unscannable. Joe spots the second hibernation pod discarded among the garbage. Since Joe possesses no money, the court assigns him a public defender, who turns out to be Frito. During the trial, both lawyers mock his appearance and proper English. Frito stands up and informs the judge that Joe also destroyed his apartment. Joe attempts to defend himself, But the courtroom erupts in continuous laughter. The judge declares Joe guilty. Meanwhile, after awakening, Rita discovers that her former profession thrives even better now that everyone has become stupid. Authorities transport Joe to the identity processing unit. During processing, the machine mistakenly records his name as not sure. The machine tattoos this new identity onto his arm. He then undergoes IQ and aptitude testing to determine his prison assignment. After completing his tests, guards escort Joe to prison. Realizing that everyone around him lacks intelligence, Joe approaches a guard and explains that he should be released today. The guard slaps him and declares he's standing in the wrong line. When they scan his tattoo, the officer confirms that he must remain in prison. Joe instructs the officer to check the files in the back office, then escapes while the officer turns away. After breaking free from prison, Joe arrives at Frito's apartment. He threatens Frito with disbarment and imprisonment. Frito believes his threats. Joe explains that since 500 years have passed, someone must have invented time travel technology. Frito appears confused initially but then reveals that a time machine exists, though it costs enormous amounts of money and breaks constantly. Joe requests his help, but Frito refuses, explaining that he went to jail for being unscannable. Joe promises Frito that if he provides assistance, Joe will return to 2005 and open a savings account with $80 billion deposited for Frito. Police officers arrive searching for Joe. Frito and Joe flee from the apartment. Joe tells Frito they must also locate Rita. They travel to the location where Joe discovered Rita's pod. He reunites with Rita and they escape in a car. Inside the vehicle, Joe explains the entire situation to Rita. The car scans Joe's arm tattoo and identifies him as a fugitive. The car's battery immediately shuts down. They abandon the vehicle and continue traveling on foot. Police arrive and destroy Frito's car. They continue walking toward the time machine. Joe informs them that the time machine sits inside a massive Costco wholesale store. They enter the Costco store. Frito tells them the machine lies an hour's journey away. Joe notices a Starbucks location that has transformed into an adult entertainment establishment. Joe's tattoo gets scanned at the store entrance, triggering security alarms. A train arrives and Frito boards, but Joe refuses to abandon Rita. Police officers arrive and place him under arrest. Instead of prison, authorities transport him to the White House. Joe's IQ test results capture the attention of the highest levels of government. Due to his superior intelligence, the president decides to appoint him Secretary of the Interior. Joe cannot believe he ranks as the smartest person in the world, considering the test he took seemed remarkably simple. President Camacho, a 5-time Ultimate SmackDown champion, calls a special summit with the world's smartest man. During the press conference, Camacho introduces Joe as the most intelligent person alive. He tells the gathered crowd that Joe will make crops grow again, fix the dust storms, and repair the economy. He also warns that if Joe fails to accomplish everything within 1 week, he will return to prison. During one of the rallies, Joe confesses to Camacho that he doesn't understand his responsibilities. He admits he doesn't even know what a Secretary of the Interior does. Camacho tells him to figure it out, noting that the position beats prison. He adds that if Joe performs well, he will receive a full presidential pardon. Later at the White House, Joe reunites with Frito. He tells Frito that he needs assistance since he knows nothing about growing crops. Joe explains that he wants to locate the time machine so he can escape this situation. Frito cannot provide proper directions, so Joe asks him to draw a map instead. He returns to the room and instructs everyone to escort him to the crop fields. He also tells them they need to find a woman named Rita because she represents a valuable asset. They all visit a crop field that appears completely withered. He calls Frito and requests the map. Frito hands him the drawing. 2 officers bring Rita to him. He tells everyone he needs a private moment with Rita. They both walk away from the group. After gaining distance from the others, Joe opens Frito's map and discovers it proves completely useless. They both return to the field. While walking, they accidentally get sprinkled by the irrigation system. Joe realizes the crops fail to grow because workers water the plants with sports drink instead of water. Brondo, the thirst mutilator, has replaced water virtually everywhere. Authorities deemed water a threat to Brondo's profit margins. During the budget crisis of 2330, the Brondo Corporation purchased both the FDA and the FCC. This acquisition enabled them to do, say, and sell anything they desired. Joe informs his team that Brondo kills the crops. He instructs his team to use water instead of Brondo. However, they remain skeptical because they find water disgusting due to its association with toilets. Joe continues trying to convince them, but they refuse to believe him. Finally, he gives up and tells them he can communicate with plants, and the plants told him they want water. This explanation convinces everyone to use water. But Joe fails to realize that Brondo contains electrolytes, which are salts that have accumulated in the topsoil for decades, killing plants and creating the dust bowls. Joe convinces everyone to replace Brondo with water for the plants, believing crops will grow over time. Time passes, yet the crops still haven't grown. Brondo stock suddenly plummets to zero, leaving half the population unemployed. Angry mobs begin rioting outside the White House. Authorities arrest Joe, and his trial takes place in the extreme court. At the trial, the court finds Joe guilty and sentences him to 1 night of rehabilitation, which actually consists of public execution in a monster truck demolition derby. Rita asks Joe if he can escape again, but Joe explains he cannot because they have chained him to a large rock this time. Joe instructs Rita to use Frito's help to reach the time machine. He urges her that once she returns to the past, she must encourage people to read books, stay in school, and inspire others to value intelligence. Joe believes the world ended up in such a degraded state because of people like him, those who never pursued anything meaningful in life. Later, Rita is packing her bags, while Joe is taken away for rehabilitation. Joe is forced into a deadly arena, where he must face off against 2 monster trucks, while driving a fragile car. As a cruel joke, the organizers strap a massive rock to the back of his vehicle. Meanwhile, outside Frito's house, Rita notices something miraculous: a crop has started to grow. Realizing the significance, she urges Frito to drive her to the rehabilitation center where Joe is being held. As they make their way through the barren landscape, they observe crops sprouting up all around. Upon arriving, they attempt to inform President Camacho about the growing crops, but he dismisses their claims, unconvinced. Back in the arena, Joe relies on his intelligence and quick thinking to outmaneuver and destroy both monster trucks. One driver, however, survives the wreck and emerges wielding a flamethrower. At this critical moment, Rita bribes the arena's cameraman to help broadcast their message. Frito joins the cameraman, and together they race to the crop field to capture undeniable proof. Joe, meanwhile, uses the large rock as cover from the flamethrower. He grabs the arena's microphone and broadcasts a message to the entire nation, urging them to use water instead of an energy drink to grow crops. At the field, Frito and the cameraman get into an argument that turns physical. During the scuffle, the camera falls and accidentally records clear footage of the flourishing crops. Rita quickly broadcasts the video to the massive screens in the rehabilitation center. Frito then picks up the camera and documents the entire thriving farm. Just as the flamethrower-wielding driver is about to finish Joe off, Camacho intervenes and saves him. Witnessing the proof of Joe's claims, Camacho declares him fully pardoned. A celebration erupts at the White House. Later, Joe thanks Rita for saving his life and mentions that Frito will take them back to the time machine. Rita, however, reveals that she no longer wants to return to the past, confessing that she had destructive habits back then which she fears falling back into. Camacho offers Joe the position of vice president. Joe initially declines, insisting he needs to return home. But after some thought, he realizes he has nothing meaningful to return to, and decides to stay. Frito supports the decision, casually remarking that the time machine ride is terrible anyway. It's then revealed that the time machine is nothing more than a dilapidated children's ride. Frito mocks Joe, saying that for someone so intelligent, he can still be pretty dumb at times. Joe serves a brief term as vice president before being elected president of the United States. Frito becomes his vice president, and Rita assumes the role of first lady. Joe and Rita go on to have 3 children, reportedly the smartest in the world, while Frito fathers 32 children with 8 wives, all of them hilariously described as the dumbest. The film ends with Rita presenting Joe with a terribly painted portrait of him. Like and subscribe the channel for more videos like these.